walk the route of the Northern Line, you'll come across a number of curious buildings at Belsize Park, Camden Town, Goodge Street, Stockwell, Clapham North, Clapham Common and Clapham South. You certainly couldn't call them pretty. Actually, they look like bunkers. And there's a good reason for that. You see, it all started in the 1930s with the New Works programme. In 1933, the London Passenger Transport Board, more commonly known as London Transport, took over London's transport. They began a programme of improvements. There would be reorganisation of some services, modernisation of others, and a whole parcel of new and rebuilt tube lines. One of the more vague plans was for a new line. This would run from Golders Green, beneath the route of the Northern Line, Charing Cross branch, to somewhere in the southern suburbs. None of the sources I've read seem to know for sure, but the general consensus seems to be somewhere around Chessington. What is known is that it would have been built to take full-sized rolling stock rather than the deep-level tubes in service on the Northern Line. I suspect something underhanded. The area around Chessington had no rail connection, although the Southern Railway were constructing their own branch line, which would open fully in May 1939. This line would connect to the main line into Waterloo, and as such could only offer a relatively sparse service. Had the underground devious scheme succeeded, they could have provided a more frequent, more direct service into central London, poaching passengers from the Southern Railway and making vast amounts of lolly. Unfortunately, the plan had hit a snag, in that permission to build the tunnels was not forthcoming. But London Transport had help from an unlikely source. Now there's a revelation you don't want to take out of context. At the outbreak of the Second World War, there was a demand for air raid shelters. The tube, of course, had been a popular refuge during the last conflict, and so it would be during this. Under pressure to provide more shelter space, the government struck a deal with London Transport. They could have their tunnels, on one condition. Until the war was over, they'd have to let them be used as deep-level air raid shelters. So it was arranged. As well as the stations mentioned previously, a shelter was built at Chancery Lane, and that's a whole story in itself. One was planned at St Paul's, but opposed for fear of destabilising the cathedral. Another was begun at Oval, but ground conditions meant it was abandoned. And by 1942, construction on the rest was complete. Just in time to miss the worst of the Blitz. So the shelters were put to other uses. General Eisenhower took over the one at Goodge Street, and that's why it's known as the Eisenhower Centre. Some, at Belsize Park, Camden Town, Stockwell, Clapham North and Clapham South, did get used for their intended purpose, after bombing intensified again. Unfortunately, the war left London Transport rather short of funds, and so after the conflict they had to abandon a number of their grand schemes, including the new line, which left the government with rather a lot of shelters and no idea what to do with them. Enter the Empire Windrush. In 1948, the British Nationality Act was passed, granting citizenship of the United Kingdom and its colonies, official title, to anyone born or naturalised in Britain or its colonies. This opened up new opportunities for those who wanted to live and work in the UK, an opportunity eagerly seized upon by many in the Caribbean. So it was that on the 21st of June 1948, before the Act had even come into effect, 802 Caribbean immigrants arrived at Tilbury aboard the Empire Windrush. But where to put them all? Fortunately, there was an obvious solution, at least for the time being. The Clapham South deep-level shelter had been used to house troops in the years following the war, and so was ideally suited for temporary accommodation. So it was that the first of the Windrush generation found themselves temporarily accommodated beneath Clapham Common. Having got a roof over their heads, or possibly a floor, the next priority was work. Britain was undergoing a labour shortage at the time, so there was plenty going around. It's fair to say that not everybody welcomed the new arrivals. Oh, there's that picture of Hitler again. I'm sorry, I don't know how that got in there. Not everyone welcomed the new arrivals, and plenty of employers decided they'd rather go without than employ the willing workers on their doorstep. They were racist, is what I'm getting at. Fortunately, London Transport, British Railways, and the new National Health Service, among others, were not so prejudiced. The nearest labour exchange to the shelter was on Cold Harbour Lane in Brixton, within walking distance. So, they had temporary shelter, and they had work. Now they needed somewhere more permanent to settle, and where better than Brixton? It was affordable, they were basically already there. It was an ideal place to build a new home and a new community. And that, dear friends, is the story of how Brixton gained its African-Caribbean community that's now so central to its identity. All because of a failed transport scheme a decade earlier. Funny how these things go, isn't it? Hello there. Many thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, why not click the like button? If you really, really liked it, why not subscribe? All feedback is welcome, that's what the comment section is for, and if there's anything you'd like me to look at in a future video, why don't you let me know? Thanks again, and have a swell day.